On the day Bayu Ang's divorce was finalized, my husband got completely drunk. I stayed up until midnight taking care of him, only to discover that his phone's album was filled with pictures of Bayu Guang. When he sobered up the following morning, he unexpectedly said, "Let's hold another wedding." I knew this was just an excuse to provoke Bayu Ang into coming back, so I smiled and agreed. Secretly, I slipped a divorce agreement into the wedding contract he signed. Elias frowned, flipping through the stack of papers, asking, "Why is this wedding contract so thick?" Being a prominent business figure in Chicago, he wasn't someone easily fooled. As he turned to the second to last page, he nearly uncovered the divorce agreement I had hidden. Although I kept my head down, I wasn't particularly anxious. "It's filled with compensation clauses. Take your time to read them," I suggested. But Elias dismissed the idea, replying, "I don't have time." Today is Serafina's return date. Years ago, when Serafina got engaged, Elias impulsively married me out of spite. Now that Serafina was divorced, he drank himself into a stupor and proposed holding another wedding, clearly another attempt to win her back. My marriage had always been a pawn in their emotional games. Elias's impatience was evident as he said, "I have to leave to pick someone up," and hurriedly signed the contract before walking out the door. The tenderness in his voice wasn't meant for me. It was reserved for Serafina. 3 days earlier, Elias had suddenly suggested having a wedding. We had been married for 5 years without any grand ceremony or public announcement. Outside of our parents and close friends, no one even knew we were married. News articles about Elias consistently referred to him as single. An occasional gossip still linked him to Serafina. Being in this hidden marriage meant my identity remained invisible, my name never acknowledged publicly. Throughout those 5 years, I had known Elias's heart belonged to someone else. Serafina was his white moonlight, the woman he adored. Though he had shown me rare moments of kindness, they were few and far between. I had tried to win his love, hoping he'd grow used to my presence, but his affection was always fleeting. This house had never felt like a home, as his smile had never been meant for me. The only time I saw Elias genuinely happy was the day he broke his no-drinking rule and got completely drunk. His grin stretched across his face as he drank, and it wasn't hard to figure out why. Serafina had just finalized her divorce. I stayed by his side until late into the night, using Serafina's birthday as the password to unlock his phone. Inside, I found an album nearly full, each photo of her, none of me. The cover photo for the album was a wedding picture of Elias and me, but my face had been edited to Serafina's. It was then I realized this 5-year marriage needed to end. All that remained was the month-long cooling-off period for the divorce. Exactly 30 days remained until the wedding Elias had promised to organize for me. As the days passed, Elias's behavior grew more distant. He left earlier and came home later, and the grand wedding he once mentioned seemed to have disappeared from his mind. I occasionally saw posts from my childhood friend featuring a woman whose face I had seen before, inside Elias's photo album. One day, during a work meeting, my company's partner asked me to bring a design draft for a new client. Coincidentally, the client's office was located directly beneath Elias's company. Rumor had it the client's representative was Elias's lover. No one at work knew of my connection to Elias, or that we were secretly married. When I arrived, I wasn't expecting to see Elias himself. He was there, presenting a beautifully wrapped gift box to a woman seated in the president's chair. Sarafina. The moment Elias noticed me, his expression froze. Everyone else in the room felt the tension. Sarafina's gaze turned curious as she asked, "Who is this?" Elias remained silent, seemingly unsure how to respond. Smiling, I introduced myself. "I'm Isa, the designer for this project," I said. Then, at the same time, Elias and I spoke. We were university classmates. My grip on the design draft tightened as I struggled to steady my trembling hands. This wasn't the first time I had covered for Elias. Nor was it the first time he hesitated to reveal the truth about our relationship. This hidden marriage, while protecting our connection, made it clear our future together was doomed. The meeting itself was tense. Elias, acting in his usual role as a sharp negotiator, pushed hard for a lower price. "Drop it by another 10%, he demanded, testing the limits of the partners' bottom line. Though they hesitated, they eventually agreed. Elias's business acumen was on full display, even as his guilt showed in fleeting glances my way. Sarafina remained calm, wearing a faint smile. She opened the gift box Elias had brought and offered everyone a piece of cake, but he quickly snatched it away. "Don't touch it. You're allergic to peanut butter," he said, concern in his voice. The scene before me cut like a knife. After 5 years of marriage, Elias still forgot my birthday and our anniversary, yet he remembered Sarafina's peanut allergy. I realized then that any semblance of care he'd shown me had been an illusion. The project moved quickly, but Elias constantly urged my partner to speed it up further. "This is Sarafina's first venture after returning, and it can't fail," he'd say. His priorities were clear. At home, he finally addressed our hidden marriage, claiming there hadn't been a suitable opportunity to announce it. "We'll make it public soon, but for now, let's focus on finishing this project," he said. I nodded, but I didn't bother reminding him about the wedding or the divorce cooling off period. As the project continued, my partner grew curious. "Do you and Elias have some kind of history?" she asked. Laughing, I brushed it off. "Of course not." But she pressed on, noting, "He looks at you with guilt in his eyes, like someone still stuck on his ex." Her words lingered, though I tried to dismiss them. 10 days remained until the end of the divorce period. On the day of a project meeting, Sarafina casually struck up a long conversation with me. I suspected she had pieced together my connection to Elias, but I responded politely nonetheless. After the meeting, Elias unexpectedly offered to drive me home. "Your performance has finally exceeded my expectations," he said. It was the first compliment he had given me in 5 years. As I gathered my things, he hesitated before asking, "Is it too late to hold that wedding?" His question caught me off guard. Lowering my head, I replied, "Then let's cancel it. There's not much time left anyway." My tone was calm, but Elias looked stunned as though he couldn't believe my response. He suddenly asked again, "You don't care?" In the past, I might have lost my composure and demanded an answer on the spot. How many conflicts in our marriage were caused by my inability to control my emotions, even though the cause of it all always stemmed from him. Shaking my head, I replied, "What's there to care about? It's just a ceremony anyway." After a long silence, Elias spoke again. "How about we visit the historic town nearby in a few days to relax?" I glanced at the countdown on my phone. Only 10 days remained in the divorce cooling off period, so I declined. His grip on the steering wheel tightened, and he nearly ran a red light. "How about the beach then? Or maybe we could finally try That Italian restaurant you've always mentioned, he suggested, offering various options. I rejected every idea. By the time we exited the car, his expression had shifted from awkward guilt to confusion and frustration. Sensing the tension, I decided to propose something myself. Why don't we visit the old house? I've been thinking about it lately. The old house was where we had lived right after our wedding, and I did feel nostalgic about it. Elias seemed taken aback by my suggestion, sitting silently in the car even after I got out, lost in his thoughts. Countdown. 1 day left in the divorce cooling off period. By unspoken agreement, Elias and I had begun avoiding appearing together at project meetings. Occasionally, when Sarafina wasn't around, Elias would unexpectedly show up and sit quietly during meetings, occasionally glancing in my direction. I didn't know what he was thinking, nor did I want to dwell on it. I had started moving out little by little, trying to be discreet. But Elias eventually noticed. That day after a meeting, he invited me to sit in his office. As soon as I sat down, he asked, "Have you been moving your things out? I've noticed you haven't been home much." I nodded and gave a prepared excuse. "I've been staying at the old house for a while." Elias hesitated before responding. "About the wedding. I've been thinking. We could reschedule it." I cut him off before he could finish. "There's no need," I said. The limited time left made any such plans unnecessary. Surprised, Elias asked, "What do you mean by limited time?" For a moment, I debated whether to show him the signed divorce agreement. At that moment, a call from Sarafina interrupted us. Seeing her name on his phone screen, I smiled faintly and said, "You should take it. We can talk later." Elias paused at the door, turning back to apologize. "I'll come to the old house tomorrow," he promised. The next day, he didn't show up. Sitting on the old house's sofa, I glanced at my phone. Countdown, 12 hours. A news alert popped up, showing Sarafina at the launch of a new project, with Elias standing beside her. Reflecting on his broken promise, I couldn't help but smile bitterly. If he knew these were my final 12 hours as his wife, would he have acted differently? Perhaps. But the answer no longer mattered. I spent the day tidying the house. There wasn't much left to pack, but the memories of starting our marriage here lingered. I called my partner to say goodbye, even though I had informed her weeks ago. Next, I contacted my lawyer to confirm the divorce process. "The agreement was notarized a month ago," the lawyer confirmed. "There's nothing more for you to do." After a brief pause, they added, "Congratulations, Isa." I smiled faintly and hung up. As the evening approached, I packed my bags, purchased a plane ticket, and began tying up loose ends. Countdown, 1 hour. I cut up every photo of us, keeping only the ones of myself. Finally, I placed the divorce agreement neatly on the table. I had thought about leaving a note, but decided against it. Instead, I whispered silently to myself, "Husband, this will be the last time I call you that. I've loved you for 10 years. Loving someone for that long is hard, but I've decided to let go. Congratulations to both of us." As the countdown ended, I grabbed my suitcase and placed my hand on the doorknob, ready to leave. Suddenly, the door swung open. Elias stood there, sweating and out of breath, his face flushed with guilt. "I'm sorry, Isa. I just dropped someone off," he explained, pausing, when his eyes landed on my luggage and the plane ticket in my hand. "Where are you going?" Wordlessly, I showed him the ticket. The name of a city, 3,000 kilometers away, written on it. He frowned. Why are you suddenly leaving? And without telling me? What if something happens to you? He asked. I shrugged and answered indifferently. It's just a job transfer. Nothing special. Elias grabbed my wrist, unwilling to let go. But we just finished a project together. Are you leaving it behind? He asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. I gently pried his fingers away, keeping a measured distance. The project is almost done. My partner will handle the rest. I have new work to focus on. My withdrawal visibly hurt him. He stood there, his hand trembling slightly as he asked, "When will you come back?" Smiling faintly, I replied, "I'm not coming back." Sadness spread across his face as he stared at me, unable to accept my words. Desperate, Elias left and returned moments later with a massive bouquet of 999 roses. Handing them to me, he said, "Isa, don't go. I've already planned the wedding for this weekend. It's everything you've ever wanted." Looking at the bouquet, I thought back to when I'd first asked him for a single rose. At the time, Elias had refused, writing in his diary that a rose could only be given to the person he truly loved. Now, faced with this extravagant gesture, I felt nothing. Taking the bouquet from him, I walked to the trash can by the door and threw it away. Elias's expression shifted from surprise to disbelief. His eyes searched mine, but I remained unmoved. "I don't need your flowers," I said firmly. "I'm leaving. Goodbye." For the first time in 5 years, Elias called my name with sincerity. "Isa," he said softly, "please don't go." I hoped it would also be the last time. Dragging my suitcase, I stepped outside, taking everything from the house with me. Elias stood alone in the empty house, lifeless and hollow. Clutching my suitcase one last time, he asked, "You're really not coming back, are you?" Taking back my suitcase, I looked at him and said, "We're already divorced. What reason do I have to return?" Elias's eyes widened slowly as the reality of my words sank in. He might have thought he misheard or was imagining things. Elias gave a strained smile and shook his head slightly. "No, that's impossible," he muttered. He started to move closer to me, but hesitated, as if afraid that one wrong move might drive me away permanently. We both stood there in an awkward stalemate. "Are you joking?" Elias finally asked, though his tone betrayed his uncertainty. "What divorce are you talking about? You never mentioned it to me, and I never agreed to it," he added, his voice tinged with desperation. Unwilling to argue further, I gripped my suitcase, turned toward the door, and said, "The divorce agreement is on the table. Read it yourself." I then called for a car to take me to the airport. As soon as my words registered, Elias rushed back into the old house. On the table lay the divorce agreement, the document I had prepared long ago. His unmistakable signature was right there, written in his strong, flowing handwriting, with the final stroke stretched just the way he liked it. There was no way Elias could fail to recognize it. However, he had no idea when he had unknowingly signed the letter signaling our goodbye. On my way to the airport, I saw Elias's name flash on my phone screen as he tried calling me. Ignoring it, I removed the SIM card and snapped it in half. The driver, noticing, chuckled and asked, "Trouble with your boyfriend?" I shook my head. "No, just my ex-husband," I replied. The driver, a talkative man, couldn't stop himself from asking, "What kind of situation leads to divorce and never seeing each other again? Did he cheat on you?" For a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond. Not exactly, I finally said. Nothing actually happened between Elias and Serafina. His concern for her was always justifiable. Nothing I could accuse him of. Serafina always conducted herself like a professional, like a proper secretary. That's all. Hearing this, the driver seemed to grow more animated and launched into a tirade about men neglecting their families, even sharing complaints about his own son-in-law. His rambling filled the ride, and before I realized it, we had arrived at the airport. After retrieving my luggage from the car, I checked in and joined the line for security. My flight wasn't set to take off for another hour and a half. Finally, I thought, I could leave behind a life that had caused me pain for a decade. Just as it was almost my turn at security, chaos erupted behind me. Elias had burst into the terminal out of breath and hurriedly pulled me out of the line. Right there, he tore the divorce agreement into pieces. "I never signed this. It doesn't count," he declared, his voice trembling. Watching the shredded paper scatter, I sighed and said flatly, "This is a public place. Please don't litter." Elias frowned, clearly caught off guard by my mundane reaction. Kicking the scraps aside, he grabbed my arm, trying to lead me away. "I don't accept this divorce." "Let's go get remarried," he said firmly. I stumbled slightly but steadied myself. "You signed it?" I countered. "I asked you to read the marriage agreement carefully, but you didn't." "How is that my fault?" Elias refused to listen and continued pulling at my arm. No matter how much he tried, I remained still. I knew Elias wasn't using all his strength. He wanted me to come with him willingly. But I am stubborn by nature. Once I make a decision, I stick to it. When we were in love, I had been just as persistent, always relenting whenever Elias asked me to. For 5 years, I had compromised repeatedly, allowing him to overstep my boundaries. I had changed so much for him, because I loved him. But now, when he tried to change my decision, I stood firm. Eventually, Elias released my hand, sensing that I no longer loved him. He stayed behind, standing amidst the scraps of paper as travelers passed by, whispering and casting curious glances his way. For someone like Elias, who had never faced humiliation, it was an unfamiliar and crushing experience. He bent down to gather the torn pieces, holding onto them as though they could somehow fix everything. But by then, I was already boarding the plane, heading to a city thousands of kilometers away, watching the clouds from my window. I felt a sense of peace as I left behind the melodrama Elias was undoubtedly still creating at the airport. After landing in the unfamiliar coastal city, I purchased a new SIM card and contacted my partner. I then blocked everyone connected to Elias on my social media accounts. Videos of him crying at the airport flooded my inbox, but I deleted and blacklisted every sender. My phone was now free from reminders of those troublesome memories. I dove into building my new business, shifting my focus entirely to work. Life without men, I realized, was surprisingly simple. My partner called me for an online meeting and excitedly informed me that the project had wrapped up successfully. There were plenty of challenges along the way, she said, but the outcome was fantastic, and it didn't affect our profits. Curious, I asked her what had happened after I stepped away from management. She responded without hesitation. It wasn't anything major. One of Elias Group's representatives was dismissed for making a serious mistake. I thought Elias valued her a lot, but it turns out it wasn't anything special. Hearing this, I couldn't help but smile. When I was his wife, Elias had no problem slashing my profits for his own gain. His ambiguous relationship with Serafina was just that, ambiguous. In the end, Elias only cared about himself. My partner mentioned plans to visit me soon and help expand the business, though I hadn't expected her to make the trip. I felt genuinely touched by the gesture. Currently, I rented a small workspace and had just one assistant. To reward her for her hard work, I often treated her to cakes from the coffee shop downstairs. The shop owner, a tall and attractive man, always caught her attention as much as the cakes themselves. One afternoon, after she had handled a mountain of documents, I went to buy her some cakes. Unfortunately, they were sold out, so I waited while the owner baked a fresh batch. Sitting at the counter, I idly replied to my assistant's messages. A news segment playing on a nearby tablet caught my attention when it mentioned Elias's name. Looking up, I saw him wearing a ring and being interviewed. A reporter asked, "You've never worn a ring before? Are you newly married?" Elias shook his head and replied, "No, I've been married for 5 years, but it was never made public for personal reasons." The reporters looked surprised and congratulated him, though one pressed further, asking why he hadn't announced it earlier. "Was there something you couldn't say?" Elias's expression grew serious as he furrowed his brows and looked straight into the camera. His heartfelt confession, "I made her angry, so I don't deserve her acknowledgement," quickly soared to the top of trending topics across major media platforms within 5 minutes. Clips highlighting his emotional moment were everywhere. I couldn't tell whether people were just bored or if Elias had orchestrated this with influencers. But watching it filled me with nothing but disgust. The charming shop owner, who was preparing freshly baked cakes, noticed my grim expression. "With a face like that, one might think you found a cockroach in my cake," he joked. I looked at him and quipped, "Posting videos like that really makes me uncomfortable. Aren't you going to compensate me for the emotional damage?" He chuckled and handed me a cake from the tray. "Compensate? Of course. Try this new recipe and give me your honest feedback." I accepted his kindness without hesitation. My business partner was arriving in a week, but was already struggling to adjust to the new environment. She handed me the client materials for an upcoming meeting. Looking utterly drained, when I glanced at the documents, I froze. How could someone so dedicated to work fall ill at such a crucial time? Naturally, I had to step in. After all, in a partnership, the work doesn't stop, regardless of who completes it. However, I regretted my decision as soon as I arrived at the hotel. Immediately, I called my partner. "You didn't tell me the client is Elias," I exclaimed. Hearing this, my partner, who had been half dead with exhaustion moments before, instantly perked up. "That's impossible. I would never make such a mistake." While we debated the situation, Elias appeared behind me. "I reached out to meet you through your client," he admitted. Standing 3 meters away, he seemed reluctant to come any closer. His caution evident, as if afraid of triggering me. "Isa, I know you don't want to see me, but I can't let you go. Please, give me another chance," he pleaded. I rolled my eyes. "Another chance? How about I give you one to leave instead?" Without finishing the meal, I left. My partner, furious with the client's decision to switch representatives without notice, made her displeasure known. The client, clearly embarrassed, endured her criticism without a word. After venting, my partner proposed, "Why not work with him? Wouldn't it be satisfying to give him hope and then crush it? Seeing how determined he is to win you over is infuriating. He needs a dose of humility. At first, I was indifferent to Elias, but his sudden interference in my peaceful life made her suggestion seem tempting. The following day, despite still recovering, my partner went to negotiate directly with Elias. I later heard that Elias lit up with energy upon learning I had agreed to collaborate. I could only smirk at the irony. The same man who ignored me for years was now moved by my every action. As the project neared completion, Elias made a grand public declaration of love outside my rented office. He arranged heart-shaped candles, brought flowers, and held up a cake while shouting, "Isa, marry me." At that moment, I happened to be ordering a celebration cake in the shop owned by the charming baker. His booming voice startled me, and the shop owner immediately guessed. "Elias's wife. Is that you?" Placing a finger over my lips, I silently urged him to keep quiet. Was this something worth bragging about? The shop owner sighed, set down his cake knife and said, "He's interrupting my business again." Walking outside, he pointed Elias in another direction, asking him to leave. Elias, however, refused. Spotting me through the doorway, he pushed past the shop owner, knelt before me, and presented the bouquet. "Isa, marry me," he repeated. The scene was absurd. 5 years after our marriage, he was finally proposing with such grandiosity. But it was too late. I took the flowers, kicked over the cake, and said only one word: leave. Beyond that, I had no desire to waste any more words on him. I hadn't even begun enjoying my partner's plan for revenge, but I was already sickened by Elias's actions. Elias, shocked, tried to grab my arm but was blocked by the shop owner. "Don't humiliate yourself any further. Can't you hear her telling you to leave?" he said firmly. Elias, submissive in my presence, but confrontational with others, snapped back. "What does this have to do with you? Are you trying to win her over with cakes? Can your little shop even cover its rent?" The shop owner calmly wagged his finger. "Wrong. I don't pay rent. I own this building. Making cakes is just a hobby of mine." Stunned, I double-checked the name on my lease. He explained, "It's under my mother's name. She's off fishing in the Pacific and left me to handle everything." Surprised, I left the shop with all the cakes, but returned the next day to pay. I also brought a decorative gift for the shop as a token of gratitude. The shop owner didn't dwell on it. Instead, he asked, "Do you want him gone for good?" After hearing our discussions, he suggested we make Elias leave empty-handed and even pay compensation for emotional distress. The partners quickly agreed. "After everything he's done to you, it's not unreasonable," they said. After some thought, I consented too. The shop owner, who usually wore a teddy bear apron, showed up at my office the next day in a sharp suit. My assistant, starstruck, could only whisper, "Stylish. Elias, look ahead. There's no future for us," I replied. He nodded slightly, forcing a bitter smile before walking away. From that point on, Elias never bothered me again. With guidance from the shop owner, my partner and I moved to a new office and officially established our company. To celebrate, we transformed the shop into a venue for hot pot, filling it with the scent of spice instead of cakes. Amidst the laughter, I switched off a news segment about Elias's company facing bankruptcy and tuned into a comedy show instead. Raising our glasses, we toasted to a brighter future, full of promise and free from the shadows of the past.